This is Avit Bhowmik. As the lead modeler for the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, Avit's current work concerns social tipping points, how societies can swiftly transform to half emissions by 2030, and how to act to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Hi, Avit. How are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Great. So please share your thoughts and your insights with us.
Thanks, Katarina. Thanks for having me. And I can't emphasize that enough, that particularly in this turbulent time of the pandemic, that the urgency of transforming food sector is higher than ever before. And I'm here to share with you some of the work that the Exponential Roadmap team and I have been doing on this topic. But before I get to the bottom of this problem, I would like to just remind everyone of the privilege that we had during the last 10,000 years, where the Mother Nature supported the whole humanity to be where we are at now. So the entire human development wasn't have been possible if this stable period of 10,000 years weren't there. Particularly the food system, which is not basically a biological and physical essential to survive, for the humanities to survive, but also the whole human development and the whole planetary system is kind of built around that. So it's kind of an eye-opening if you think about it, because that wouldn't have been possible before when we went through several ice ages and the temperature was so fluctuating. But this 10,000 years, this Goldilocks equilibrium period of Holocene, where the temperature fluctuation was only between plus minus 1 degree Celsius, actually supported us to build this entire food system that we are taking benefit from. But yet, the last 300 years changed everything. When we learned how to convert one form of energy into another, the Industrial Revolution, and that spread all over the world, particularly the food production. If you think about the massive industrialization of food production that has taken place, the massive industrial meat production that has been happening, and all the things around the massive industrialization left a massive human footprint all over the world. And now I'm talking about today, we are emitting 5.6 billion tons of nitrous oxide and methane just from our food choices, the dietary pattern we have adopted, and the food we are wasting. And there is a huge paradox here if you think about it. In the Western industrialized countries where we are on an unsustainable way, we are shifting more and more to a meat-based diet, whereas there are countries like Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh, where I'm from, are suffering from massive burden of malnutrition. So if you want to solve this dilemma of taking those countries out, 1 billion people out of malnutrition burden, but at the same time, continue following this meat-based, unsustainable way, it would be likely that by 2050, we will end up with doubling this greenhouse gas emission from the food sector. And not only that, the food that we are consuming, the production of it, the agricultural system, is actually adding up another 7 billion tons of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere every year. So food and agriculture together is responsible for 12.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emission every year. And this can't continue. We have to transform that. And that's what Exponential Roadmap is all about. We are trying to scale up the solutions to bring humanity to a sustainable path, to a path that will take us to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a path that shows how to halve global greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2030. But you are probably wondering that how on earth would it be possible where our food choices and dietary pattern are so unsustainable and we have to get rid of this massive malnutrition burden to draw down this emission and halve emission from the food consumption sector? Well, it isn't. And the good news is we don't have to. So if you think about it, we are currently emitting 5.6 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and that will likely end up with 9.8 billion tons by 2050. But what we have to do, actually, just to draw it down to 5 billion tons of greenhouse gases per year. which is the planetary boundary for food, which is the boundary within which the humanity can operate safely. It doesn't look like much if you think about it, but if you look at the actual figure that we are on an unsustainable Earth and we need to get rid of this malnutrition burden, actually by 2030, it's not just the reduction from 5.6 billion tons to 5.3 billion tons, it's actually a reduction from 6.8 billion tons to 5.3 billion tons. And that's a tremendous achievement. And we can achieve that by adopting healthy, sustainable diet that is plant-rich. If 70% of the global population adopt this diet, we will manage to achieve that. And that has to be coupled up with 50% reduction of food loss and food waste. And by adopting those, the healthy and sustainable diet and reducing food waste, actually will come up with several co-benefits and the impact we will see in the agricultural sector. Because when you decide to cut off your meat consumption and you adopt sustainable agricultural practices, actually that will avoid a lot of forest from deforestation, from cutting down. And that has to be coupled up with sustainable grazing, with improvement of the rice cultivation and the avoided peatland impacts. And if we manage to do that, we can actually exponentially draw down the emission from the agricultural sector, this 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases, to 50% by 2030, and we can follow a sustainable path. But that's not what makes the food sector the dark horse here. What actually we often don't realize is the tremendous power of the food sector to sequester greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So I was talking about the co-benefits. So if we shift to a sustainable diet and reduce our food waste and adopt sustainable agriculture, that will actually open up a massive amount of land that can be reforested and restored. And if you follow all these practices and sustainable practices, it would be actually possible to rapidly scale up the greenhouse gas sequestration process. And there's a tremendous potential there. By 2050, we will manage actually 15.6 billion tons of greenhouse gases to sequester from the atmosphere. And if you follow this sustainable path, by 2030, we will achieve more than half of it. So that's where we lie, and that's what's the path we have to adopt. And if you now look at the whole systemic picture, that's even more extravagant if you think about it. So you heard from several speakers before, they were talking about the halving greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector, from the industry sector. And if we couple that up with the food sector, just to draw it down to the planetary boundary for food for 5 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and halve greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector, and at the same time, rapidly and exponentially increase the potential of the carbon sinks to sequester of the greenhouse gas emissions, that will actually lead to more than half of the greenhouse gas reduction from all the sector system-wide by 2030. And if you follow that path, by 2050, we will actually end up with a 614 billion tons of carbon budget, a budget that Christiane Figueres and several other global organizations have been pushing for in order to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we can achieve that by following those paths. And very importantly, and most importantly here, if we manage to do all of those, actually we will manage to reach the drawdown point, a point where we will sequester more greenhouse gases from the atmosphere than we actually emit. Project Drawdown calls it the drawdown point. Some calls it the negative emission by 2039. Without implementing any artificial negative emission technologies, without BECCS, without carbon capture technologies, just using the nature-based solutions, changing our behavior, changing our dietary pattern, and halving emissions from energy, industry, and buildings, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge potential there that's driven by the food sector, and that's what makes it the dark horse here. So it's up to us, actually, what we want to achieve. So do we want to maintain this meat and dairy-based unhealthy diet, unsustainable diet that we're following now? Or do you want to adopt a healthy, sustainable diet that is plant-rich and that is also healthy? And that would imply the particularly rapidly cutting the meat consumption, and to draw it down to 14 grams of red meat per day on a plate. If you're wondering if that's impossible, I can testify that actually it is possible, because I managed to do that. And I cut down my, I'm not a vegetarian, but I managed to cut down my red meat consumption. And I managed to draw it down because I consume red meat that is sustainably produced, that is free range, that is organically produced every other week or less frequently. And if I consume in a week the red meat, that's 220 grams maximum. So that brings it down to 14 grams or less. So it is possible. We just need to follow that way. And there are several other organizations working on to how to motivate people to bringing in alternatives, what could help people in achieving that, and also to reduce food waste. So that's where we are. So that's on our hand now. If we choose to adopt a sustainable diet, a plant-rich, meat-less sustainable diet, we can actually save the world. And I hope that humanity will do so. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Avit, for that inspiring presentation. And let's see what questions we have from the viewers on this hot topic.
Yeah, so there's a question here from Tessa Louise Brooke, saying, what major changes would happen if global meat consumption dropped significantly? Are there any, and I don't know what significant means, by the way, but what in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and what in terms of other potential benefits or downsides of changing global meat production?
Well, there is no short answer to that. I guess that's a long answer, but I guess the main benefit here is the health benefit. You need to think about it, because consumption of massive amount of meat is not only responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions, but it's actually tremendously unhealthy. And we are following that path. And from an evolutionary perspective, from a health perspective, it's actually way healthier when we adopt a plant-rich diet and substantially cut down of the greenhouse, cut down the meat consumption. We don't have to get rid of the meat that has some co-benefits, that has some biodiversity benefit, that has some benefit even for the agricultural production. But eventually, what the message should be there, that we can't overdo that. If you think about it, an adult human being needs 40 grams of protein every day, and you could actually consume all of it from the meat, from the red meat. But what's happening currently in Europe, we consume 36% more, and in US we are consuming 120% more. So that's where the problem lies. So if we can get this message through and change the production pattern accordingly, that is just enough for maintain a sustainable life, for maintain a healthy life, I think that would make a lot of difference here.